What would you do if your own blood betrayed you? Most people think betrayal comes from strangers, but the sharpest knife always comes from family. My sister, the one I once trusted with my secrets and childhood memories, tried to rob me of everything I had built. Not just a little, she wanted half of my fortune. She dressed her greed as justice, standing in court and pretending I owed her a life she had never worked for. I watched her play the victim, her voice trembling, eyes filling with crocodile tears, painting me as the villain. The judge listened carefully, and for a moment I almost believed she might win. But I came prepared. I carried an envelope. Not money, not a bribe, but something far more powerful. The truth. Every dirty trick she pulled, every lie she told, every message where she admitted her plans to drain me dry. It was all inside. When I slid that envelope across the judge's desk, his eyes widened, and then he laughed. Not out of disrespect, but at the audacity of her scheme. My sister's mask cracked right there in the courtroom. Her face turned pale, her fake tears vanished, and her trembling act collapsed. That was the moment I realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. Sometimes the worst enemies live under your own roof. Sometimes love blinds you until greed rips the blindfold away. That day, I didn't just defend my fortune. I defended my dignity, my hard work, and my future. She tried to steal half my life, but I gave the judge something that exposed her for what she really was. A thief hiding behind the word family. When I look back on my childhood, I see two faces always beside me. My mother's, tired but strong, and my sister's, full of mischief and dreams. We grew up in a small house with walls so thin you could hear the neighbors arguing. But to us, it was home. My sister, Aisha, and I shared almost everything. The same bed on cold winter nights, the same plate of rice when food was short, and the same whispered secrets in the dark when we were too afraid of the world outside. Back then, I believed we were unshakable, that no matter how poor we were or how hard life pressed us, we had something richer than money, each other. I can still remember her laughter when we would race down the dusty lanes of our neighborhood, barefoot, hair wild in the wind. I can still remember how she held my hand tightly the day our father left and never came back, promising me with teary eyes that as long as we were together, we would survive. And we did survive. But survival turned us into different people. I became the one who worked, who hustled, who took on small jobs to bring home a few coins, while she stayed home, helping our mother, dreaming of an easier life. I did not mind. I was proud to carry the weight because in my heart, I believed that one day I would give my sister the life she dreamed about. That was the promise I silently made to myself as I dragged crates at the market and cleaned dishes in restaurants, my fingers blistered and my back aching. Years passed, and my hard work began to pay off. I left those small jobs behind and built something of my own. A small company that started in a cramped office with peeling paint but grew into something real, something respected. Every success I had I shared with Aisha. When I bought my first car, she was the first person I drove around the city, letting her feel the freedom of rolling down the windows and laughing as the wind brushed past her face. When I bought our mother a better house, it was Aisha who helped me decorate it, choosing curtains and rugs as if she was building her own palace. I remember watching her then, her eyes shining, and I thought, this is what I always wanted, to see her happy, to see her safe. Money never meant much to me. It was simply a tool to protect the people I loved. And no one, I thought, deserved it more than my sister. But life has a way of twisting love into something unrecognizable. Slowly, I began to see changes in her. Changes so subtle at first that I brushed them aside. When I gave her money, she no longer said thank you with the warmth I remembered. She began to expect it, as though it were her right. At family gatherings, she would complain half-jokingly about how I was the rich one, while she was left behind. Her voice light but her eyes sharp. I told myself she was only teasing, but deep down, something about it unsettled me. She began asking for larger amounts. First for small luxuries, then for debts she had hidden from me. Debts I later learned were the result of careless spending. Each time I helped, thinking she would learn to be careful, but each time the hole only grew deeper. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and old memories, turned into requests and excuses. I tried to talk to her gently, telling her that wealth was not endless, that she too needed to stand on her own feet. She would smile sweetly and nod, but within days she would be back asking again. And when I finally refused, just once, her face hardened in a way I had never seen before. Her voice, usually soft when speaking to me, turned sharp. "You have more than enough," she snapped. "What do you even need it for? You think I'll live small while you live like a king?" I was stunned. This was my sister, the girl I had carried on my shoulders when she was too tired to walk home from school, the girl I had sworn to protect. I tried to calm her, but something had shifted. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if perhaps I had created this distance myself by giving too much, by making her believe she was entitled to everything I earned. The breaking point came months later. A letter arrived at my office, neatly stamped, carrying words that made my blood run cold. It was a court notice. My sister had filed a case against me, demanding half of my fortune. She claimed I had promised it to her, that all I owned was as much hers as it was mine. I sat frozen in my chair, reading the letter again and again, each sentence cutting deeper. Betrayal is not just an act. It is a wound that bleeds memory. Every childhood moment, every laugh we had shared, every sacrifice I had made, all of it flashed before me and then shattered into pieces. My staff noticed the change in me that day. I barely spoke, barely moved. Inside, I was fighting an invisible storm, trying to make sense of how love could turn into greed so quickly. When I confronted her, she did not even flinch. She stood there in her living room, arms crossed, eyes cold. "I deserve it," she said plainly. "Half of everything. Do you think you built this alone? Do you think I didn't sacrifice anything?" I wanted to scream, to shake her, to remind her of the nights I worked until dawn while she slept peacefully, of the money I had poured into her life to keep her safe, of the dreams I had put aside so that she could chase hers. But the words stuck in my throat because I realized they would mean nothing to her now. She had already made her choice. That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the city lights outside the window. For the first time, wealth felt heavy like a curse. I thought about giving her what she wanted, just to end the war, but a small voice inside me refused. Not because of the money, but because of the principle. She wasn't just trying to take from me. She was trying to erase everything I had worked for, to claim it as her own. I decided then that I would fight, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with truth. I began collecting every piece of evidence. Messages where she admitted she needed help, bank transfers that showed I had supported her, records that proved she had no share in my company. I placed them carefully into an envelope, sealing not just paper but years of trust that had been broken. As I prepared for court, I felt a strange calm. Pain still lingered, yes, but it was no longer the raw wound of shock. It was a scar forming, hardening me, teaching me a lesson I had never wanted to learn. The girl who once held my hand in the dark was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. But I would not let her take the life I had bled to build. The first chapter of this war was written not in the courtroom, but in my heart, in the quiet acceptance that sometimes family is not who you think they are. Sometimes the enemy wears the face of the one you love most. And as I folded that envelope and set it on my desk, I whispered to myself, this is not just about money. This is about respect, about dignity, about the truth finally being louder than her lies. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a heaviness that I could feel deep in my chest, like a stone pressing against my lungs. I barely slept the night before, lying awake with the echoes of my sister's voice running through my mind. Her words sharp and cold. I deserve it. They stung worse than any insult a stranger could throw at me, because they came from the one person I thought would always stand on my side. As I dressed in a plain suit, I wasn't thinking about victory or defeat. I was thinking about survival, about keeping my name, my dignity, and the truth intact. When I walked out of my apartment, the city was still waking up. The streets were lined with people rushing to jobs, vendors arranging their stalls, children pulling at their mothers' hands, laughter and noise mixing into the air. But for me, the world seemed muffled, distant, as though I was walking through a fog. My driver offered me a polite good morning, but I barely nodded. All I could think about was how my life had come to this point. Sitting in a car on the way to fight my own sister in front of strangers who would decide which one of us was telling the truth. When I reached the courthouse, its tall gray walls stood like a fortress, cold and intimidating. The iron gates creaked as they opened, and the sound echoed in my chest like a warning bell. People crowded the steps, some lawyers clutching thick files, some families whispering nervously, and others sitting silently as though weighed down by their troubles. I walked through them, each step heavy, the envelope of evidence tucked safely in my briefcase. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, but I kept my face calm. The last thing I wanted was to let anyone, especially my sister, see fear in my eyes. As I entered the courtroom, the smell of old wood and paper filled my nose. The benches were already half full with strangers waiting for their cases. The judge's seat stood at the front, high and imposing, empty for now but radiating authority. Lawyers moved about, adjusting their robes, flipping through documents, speaking in quick whispers. I found my place near the front, my lawyer by my side, though I barely heard his reassurances. My eyes were drawn to the door across the room, and when it opened, my heart sank. She walked in, my sister, not the girl I remembered from childhood, but a woman dressed in expensive clothes, her face painted with confidence. Her lawyer walked beside her, carrying a thick file as though it contained her golden ticket. She didn't look at me right away, but when her eyes finally met mine, there was no warmth, no hesitation, only a cold determination that told me she had already convinced herself she was right. She smiled faintly, a smile that felt like mockery, and took her seat. I wanted to look away, but my gaze locked on her, my mind unwilling to accept that this was the same sister I once carried on my shoulders when she was too tired to walk. My lawyer nudged me, whispering that the judge was about to enter, and I tore my eyes away just as the doors at the front opened. The judge, an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes, walked in briskly. The room fell silent, the air heavy with expectation. He sat, adjusted his glasses, and glanced over the schedule. Then his gaze lifted, and for the first time, his eyes swept over us. Me calm but tense, and my sister radiant in her false confidence. The hearing began with her lawyer speaking first. His voice was smooth, trained, the kind of voice that could make lies sound like truths. He painted a picture of sacrifice and broken promises, claiming that my sister had spent her life supporting me, that I had built my fortune on her back, that I owed her half of everything because without her, I would never have succeeded. I listened in silence, my hands clenched under the table, every word striking like a hammer against my skull. I wanted to shout, to object, to tell the world it was all lies, but my lawyer reminded me to stay calm. I glanced at my sister as her lawyer spoke, and I saw her lowering her eyes, pretending to be shy, pretending to be the victim. At one point, her voice even cracked, and she dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief as though the weight of her sacrifice was too much to bear. The people sitting in the benches shifted uncomfortably, some looking at me with suspicion. For a moment, even I wondered if the performance might sway the judge. When it was my lawyer's turn, he spoke firmly, presenting the facts, reminding the court that no legal or financial documents tied my sister to my company, that she had no involvement in its growth. But I could sense it wasn't enough. Facts, though powerful, often feel dry compared to tears. My sister's lawyer interrupted several times, raising objections, each one designed to distract, to make me look guilty, evasive. My heart raced as the room swayed between truth and falsehood, and I realized that this was not just about logic. It was about presentation, about emotion. That was when I reached for my briefcase, my fingers brushing against the envelope inside. The judge, tired of the back and forth, leaned forward and asked if I had anything further to present. His eyes narrowed slightly as though testing me, as though he had seen hundreds like me before, brothers and sisters tearing each other apart over wealth. Slowly, with steady hands, I pulled out the envelope and slid it across the table. The room grew still. My lawyer opened it and handed the papers to the judge. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the first page. His eyebrows rose. He flipped to the next, and then the next. his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. A quiet chuckle escaped his lips, then another, until he leaned back in his chair and let out a laugh that echoed through the silent courtroom. Every head turned. My sister froze, her confident mask cracking for the first time. The judge looked directly at her, his laughter subsiding into a sharp smile. "Do you think this court is blind?" he asked, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Do you believe your lies could stand against this?" He lifted the papers high for all to see. Messages where she admitted she depended on me for money, receipts showing the countless transfers I had made to bail her out of debt. Her own emails begging for help while promising she would never claim more than I had already given. The truth lay naked on those pages, undeniable, unshakable. My sister's face turned pale, her lips parting but no words coming out. She reached for her lawyer, whispering urgently, but his face had already fallen, the weight of defeat written across it. I sat there in silence, my heart pounding, not with victory but with something darker, grief. The judge continued to reprimand her, warning her of the seriousness of lying under oath, reminding her that the court was not a stage for personal grudges. His words were stern, but my mind drifted as I looked at her. This was the girl who once clung to me when thunder roared outside, who once cried in my arms when she scraped her knee, who once promised me we would always stand together. And now she sat before me, humiliated, exposed, her dreams of easy wealth crumbling into dust. When the judge finally dismissed her claims, the room buzzed with whispers. Some looked at me with respect, others with pity, but I felt neither triumphant nor relieved. I felt empty, as though a piece of me had died there in that courtroom. I gathered my briefcase, stood slowly, and walked past her. For a second our eyes met. There was no apology in hers, only a flicker of bitterness, of anger at being caught. She turned her face away before I could search deeper. I walked out of the courthouse into the harsh sunlight, the noise of the city flooding my ears. People moved around me, laughing, talking, living their ordinary lives, but I felt like a ghost among them. I had defended my fortune, yes, but in doing so, I had lost something more precious, the sister I once knew. And though the judge had laughed at her lies, all I could hear inside was the echo of my own heart breaking. When I left the courthouse that day, I thought the worst was over, but I was wrong. The judge had dismissed her case, her lies had been exposed, and I should have felt safe. But betrayal doesn't vanish with a verdict. It lingers like smoke after a fire, clinging to everything it touches. As I stepped into the sunlight, my phone buzzed with messages from relatives, some congratulating me for standing strong, others scolding me for dragging family matters into public view. Their words cut me in different ways. Some said I had humiliated my sister, as though I had chosen this war. Others praised me, saying I was brave to defend myself. But I didn't feel brave or proud. I felt hollow, as though something inside me had been carved out and thrown away. That night, when I finally got home, I sat alone in the dark, the city lights glowing faintly through my window. My briefcase lay on the table, the same envelope inside, but instead of triumph, it felt like a coffin holding the last remains of trust. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands shook so badly I almost spilled it. I kept seeing her face, the shift from arrogance to fear, the pale silence when the judge laughed at her lies. I should have felt vindicated, but all I saw was my sister's downfall, and I could not stop wondering if I had been too harsh, if somehow I could have prevented it all before it reached the court. In the days that followed, the whispers in the family grew louder. My phone rang constantly, uncles, aunts, cousins, all with their opinions. "She is your sister, forgive her," one said. Another snapped, "You let greed ruin blood ties." They didn't understand. They hadn't sat there listening to her lie with such conviction. Hadn't watched her try to strip me of everything I had worked for. Still, the guilt gnawed at me, as though I had betrayed her rather than the other way around. At night I lay awake, wondering if blood really was thicker than water, or if it was just a phrase people used to excuse the worst betrayals. My mother, caught in the middle, became a silent casualty of the war. She called me one evening, her voice trembling. "Beta," she said softly, "whatever happened, she is still your sister. You too must find peace. I swallowed hard because I wanted peace more than anything, but peace requires honesty, and my sister had shown none. I didn't tell my mother about the bitterness in Aisha's eyes when I walked past her in court, the look that said she wasn't done yet. Instead, I simply said, "I will try, Ami," even though I didn't know how. 1 week later, I received an invitation to a family gathering. It was a cousin's wedding, and I knew both Aisha and I would be there. I considered avoiding it, but my absence would spark more gossip, more whispers about broken ties, and I was tired of being painted as the villain. So I went. The hall was decorated with golden lights, music filling the air, laughter echoing off the walls. But the moment I stepped in, I felt eyes on me, some sympathetic, others judgmental. I moved through the crowd, smiling faintly, greeting relatives, but all the while searching for her. And then I saw her. Aisha stood near the stage, dressed beautifully as always, her laughter ringing out as she spoke to a group of cousins. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the girl I once knew, carefree and radiant. But when her eyes found mine across the room, the laughter vanished. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her jaw tightened, and she turned away as if I were a stranger. My heart ached, but I forced myself to approach her, not out of anger but out of a desperate need to bridge the distance. When I reached her, she didn't look at me. "Aisha," I said quietly, my voice almost swallowed by the music around us. "We need to talk." She finally turned, her eyes sharp, her tone clipped. "There is nothing left to talk about." I tried to stay calm. "You tried to take something that wasn't yours." I had to defend myself. "But I don't want this fight to go on forever." She scoffed, the sound bitter. "Defend yourself. You embarrassed me in front of the whole world. Do you think I can ever forget that? Do you think the family will forget? You made me look like a liar." I swallowed the urge to remind her she was lying. Instead, I said softly, "I didn't want this. I never wanted us to stand against each other. But you forced my hand." Her eyes glistened, but not with regret, with fury. "You think you've won, but you haven't. You just made an enemy out of your own blood." With that, she turned and walked away, her back stiff, leaving me standing there with a knot in my chest. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I smiled at people, joined conversations, but inside my thoughts churned like a storm. Her words echoed in my head. "You just made an enemy out of your own blood." I had hoped that exposure in court would humble her, make her realize the depth of her mistake, but instead it had hardened her. The battle was not over. It had only shifted into something darker, quieter, more personal. On my way home, the city lights blurred through the car window, and for the first time in years I felt unsafe. Not because of strangers or business rivals, but because of the person who once shared my childhood bed. Days turned into weeks, and though no new legal papers arrived, small signs of her resentment began to appear. A close business associate told me that Aisha had approached him, warning him not to trust me. A distant cousin mentioned she had been spreading rumors, painting me as greedy, selfish, claiming I had abandoned my family in pursuit of wealth. Each whisper was like a thorn, small but painful, and though I tried to ignore them, I knew they were planting seeds in people's minds. I kept working, kept building my company, but the shadow of her betrayal followed me everywhere. Clients asked quiet questions, employees gave me cautious looks, and I realized that even though I had won in court, the trial was far from over. One evening, I sat in my office long after everyone else had gone home, the city skyline glowing in the distance. I thought about the long road I had traveled, from the boy dragging crates at the market to the man running a company, from the brother who promised to protect his sister to the man now branded as her enemy. I wondered what my father would have said if he had been there, if he would have scolded me for letting money divide us, or if he would have stood beside me, reminding me that hard work cannot be stolen. My thoughts grew heavy, and for a moment I felt tears sting my eyes. I had not cried in years, but that night, sitting in the emptiness of my office, I let a single tear fall, not for my lost fortune but for my lost sister. And yet, deep inside, a flame of determination burned. I realized I could not spend the rest of my life drowning in her betrayal. I had to be stronger not just for myself but for my mother, for the people who depended on me, for the dignity I had fought to protect. If Aisha wanted to continue her war, I would not bend, I would not break. But if there was ever a chance to bring her back, to heal what had been broken, I knew I would still take it. Because despite everything, despite the lies and the courtrooms and the threats, she was still my sister. And the hardest truth I had to face was this. Love does not disappear just because trust has been shattered. It lingers, stubborn and painful, like a wound that refuses to heal. And as I closed my office that night, I whispered a prayer. Not for myself, but for her, that one day she would see the truth before it was too late. After the courthouse and the family gathering, I had hoped that the storm surrounding my sister would settle, that perhaps pride or shame would teach her to retreat, to reconsider the bridge she had burned. But I was wrong. Aisha, instead of stepping back, seemed to grow sharper. Her resentment simmering into something more dangerous, like a quiet fire spreading under dry leaves. I began to notice subtle things first. A suspicious call from a business partner, vague mentions of rumors, colleagues whispering behind closed doors. At first, I tried to ignore them, dismissing them as coincidence, but over time, the patterns became clear. She was planning, maneuvering, manipulating people, trying to weaken me in ways that weren't obvious, ways that required patience and cunning. I realized then that the courtroom battle had only been the beginning, a small skirmish in what could become a long war. My chest tightened every time I thought of her walking freely, scheming while pretending to be innocent, smiling in public as she plotted to claim something that would never belong to her. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, careful about whom I trusted, and reluctant to share anything about my business or personal life. Aisha had taught me the hard lesson that sometimes family is the most unpredictable and dangerous enemy. It started subtly at first. I noticed emails disappearing from my inbox, documents mysteriously altered, minor misunderstandings amplified into gossip among my employees. She wasn't direct. She never approached me openly. Instead, she used others, weaving a web of deceit and half-truths that slowly began to erode trust around me. One evening, I discovered that a client, a major one who had been loyal for years, had received a call from her. They were told that I was dishonest, that my business practices were unfair, that I was untrustworthy. I confronted the client, and fortunately I managed to clarify everything, but the damage was subtle and terrifying. Each time I thought I had contained one problem, another surfaced. It became clear to me that Aisha had moved beyond mere greed. This was personal. She wanted to hurt me, to take away not only what I had built but also the reputation I had worked so hard to maintain. The thought of her enjoying the chaos she caused made my blood boil. I started to investigate quietly, using the skills I had developed over the years running my company. I checked phone records, tracked messages, and gathered evidence of her interference. I discovered she had been speaking to several people connected to my business, planting seeds of doubt, exaggerating minor mistakes, and subtly attacking my credibility. She had become a master manipulator, and it frightened me to see how far she was willing to go. I realized that while I had legal power, I also had to prepare for psychological warfare. She had already proven she could lie convincingly in court. Outside, her lies were just as potent because they were harder to document. I knew I needed to act strategically, carefully, or she could dismantle everything I had built piece by piece, not with a lawsuit but with subtle sabotage. At home, the tension became almost unbearable. My mother, caught in the middle, started showing signs of stress. She would call me constantly, asking if I had heard anything about Aisha's latest moves, her voice full of worry. I reassured her, but I could see the anxiety in her eyes, and it cut me deeply. Family had become a battlefield, a place where loyalty and love were questioned, and I was at the center of it. I wondered how my life had come to this point, how the bond one had shared with my sister, the shared laughter and tears of childhood, had transformed into a complex web of suspicion and resentment. Sometimes I wanted to confront her directly, to demand that she stop, to remind her of the sister I had loved and protected. But every time I thought about that, I remembered her words at the wedding, the bitterness in her tone, the promise of continued animosity. I realized that direct confrontation could backfire. This time I had to be smarter than her, faster and more patient. I spent countless nights planning, thinking of ways to protect my company, my reputation, and my life from her schemes. I reached out quietly to allies I could trust, people who had proven themselves loyal through thick and thin, and asked them to be vigilant. I created protocols for communications, tightened security around business documents, and made backup plans for every potential move she could make. It felt exhausting living in constant alert, but I knew it was necessary. Aisha had shown me that family could not be taken for granted, that love and blood ties were not shields against betrayal. I realized that while I could hope for reconciliation, I also had to prepare for conflict, and that preparation required patience, intelligence, and restraint. Despite all the precautions, there were moments when her presence haunted me in unexpected ways. I would hear her name in conversations I hadn't initiated, see glimpses of her in public, or receive veiled messages suggesting she was still monitoring my actions. It became clear she wanted to instill fear, to make me feel vulnerable and uncertain. But I refused to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I focused on what I could control: my actions, my responses, and my own moral integrity. I realized that while I could not stop her thoughts or intentions, I could control my own, and that was where my strength lay. Every step I took was calculated to protect myself while minimizing the risk of giving her any leverage. Then came the day I discovered her most audacious move yet. Through careful investigation, I learned that she had been attempting to manipulate a business investor, someone who had previously been interested in partnering with me. She had met them privately, presenting a distorted version of our relationship and my character, suggesting that I was untrustworthy and unreliable. The audacity of her actions left me momentarily speechless. This was no longer just about money or attention. This was about her attempting to rewrite the narrative of my life, to make me appear unworthy in the eyes of those I had worked with tirelessly for years. I realized then that she was dangerous not because she was rich or powerful, but because she was clever, patient, and willing to exploit every small advantage she could find. The realization made me both fearful and resolute. Fearful because the battle ahead would be more complicated than I had imagined. Resolute because I understood that I could not let her win. I decided it was time to act, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with strategy. I called my lawyer and a trusted business consultant, sharing with them everything I had discovered. Together, we devised a plan not just to protect my assets but to ensure that Aisha could not use lies or manipulation to harm me again. We created secure channels for communication, implemented clear documentation for all business dealings, and developed a network of allies who would act quickly if any further interference arose. I felt a sense of control returning, a small but significant victory in a war that had begun to feel endless. At the same time, I could not ignore the personal toll. My mother's health began to decline slightly under the stress of our fractured family. I would sit with her, holding her hand and trying to offer comfort, but I knew that the tension between my sister and me weighed heavily on her heart. I began to reflect deeply on the nature of family, trust, and betrayal. I realized that sometimes love alone was not enough to prevent harm, and that the strongest armor one could have was a combination of foresight, intelligence, and careful planning. I promised myself that I would not let Aisha's schemes control my life, and that I would protect those I loved, even if it meant carrying the weight of vigilance alone. By the end of that month, the quiet tension had become a permanent presence in my life. I moved through each day carefully, aware of the subtle ways she might attempt to disrupt my world. And yet, despite the constant pressure, I began to see a strange kind of clarity emerge. I understood that the true measure of strength was not how much I could protect myself, but how I could maintain my dignity and integrity in the face of someone determined to destroy it. Aisha had shown me the worst of human nature, but she had also revealed the depth of my own resilience. I was learning to navigate not only business challenges but emotional and familial ones with careful precision, understanding that survival required both courage and wisdom. And so life continued in this delicate balance. Every day, I watched for signs of her influence, strengthened my defenses, and tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for my mother and for the people who depended on me. Yet I knew that the war with my sister was far from over. She would continue to test limits, to push boundaries, and to attempt new strategies to claim what was never hers. But I had grown, learned, and prepared in ways I never imagined. I realized that while I could not change her actions, I could control my response. And in that control lay my greatest power. And as I sat alone one night, reviewing every plan, every precaution, and every step I had taken, I whispered to myself quietly, not with hope or anger, but with certainty. She may try again, but I will be ready, and this time there would be no room for her to deceive, no space for lies to flourish, no opportunity for betrayal to succeed. The war was ongoing, but I had become stronger than I had ever been, and the lesson was clear. Family may betray, but the truth, strategy, and perseverance are forces no one can take away. The months following my careful preparations passed in a tense rhythm, each day measured, each interaction scrutinized, as I continued to fortify my life against my sister's schemes. I had come to accept that she would not give up easily, that her desire for revenge and control ran deeper than I had imagined, but I also felt a quiet strength growing within me. Every precaution, every plan, every ally I had enlisted was a shield, and now it was time to put them to the test. One morning, I received a call from a longtime client, sounding nervous and hesitant. They told me that Aisha had attempted once again to manipulate them, presenting false claims about my business and personal character, trying to sabotage an upcoming deal that could have been critical to my company's growth. I stayed calm, hiding the anger that surged through me. I had anticipated this, and I had prepared for it. I assured the client that all the information she had shared was false, and I sent them verified documentation that clearly proved the truth. Their doubts vanished as they reviewed the evidence, and they expressed gratitude for my transparency. That moment gave me a renewed sense of control. The trap she had set was now exposed, and I could see clearly how determined she had been, and how carefully I had countered every move. Aisha's audacity, however, did not end there. I began noticing subtle but deliberate attempts to undermine my reputation online and in social circles. Messages circulated about my character, rumors whispered among people who didn't know the full story. But this time I was ready. I used my resources to track the origins of these messages and discovered that she had been orchestrating them herself, contacting acquaintances, friends of friends, and even strangers, to spread half-truths designed to hurt me. I realized that she was desperate, no longer calculating but reckless, and that gave me an advantage. While her schemes had grown bolder, they had also become sloppy. Every attempt she made to create confusion left traces, and I followed each carefully, collecting evidence. I compiled everything, not just for my protection but to confront her finally, to make her understand the depth of the consequences she had brought upon herself. The patience and restraint I had cultivated over the past months were now my greatest weapons. Finally, I decided it was time for a direct confrontation. I contacted her, inviting her to meet me in a neutral location, a quiet cafe where we could speak without witnesses or interruptions. When she arrived, her posture was rigid, her eyes cautious but defiant, as if she anticipated a trap. I motioned for her to sit, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the tension radiating off her, the carefully constructed facade of confidence wavering slightly. "Aisha," I began calmly, "this has gone far enough. You've tried to manipulate people, sabotage my business, and destroy my reputation, all to claim something that was never yours. But I want to end this, not with more lies or court battles, but with honesty." Her eyes narrowed, and I could see the mix of anger and fear behind them. She opened her mouth to speak, but I continued, sliding a folder across the table. "Everything you've done, every attempt to harm me, every false claim you've spread, it's all documented here. You can deny it all you want, but the truth is undeniable." She glanced at the folder, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of hesitation. Her lips parted, but no words came out, and her confident demeanor faltered as she realized the extent of the evidence I had gathered. For a long while, silence stretched between us. Finally she spoke, her voice softer than I had ever heard. I didn't think you would be able to prove it," she admitted, though her pride kept her from showing full remorse. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze steadily. Aisha, this isn't about winning or losing. It's about the choices we make and the consequences that follow. You had a chance to build a life alongside me, to share in the happiness and success we could have had, but you chose deceit. You chose lies. And now you must face the outcome of those choices. Her eyes filled with tears, though she quickly wiped them away, trying to maintain control. I stayed calm, allowing the weight of my words to sink in, knowing that this confrontation, not anger, would finally force her to see the reality she had been avoiding for so long. Over the next few hours, we spoke openly, the tension slowly giving way to something heavier, truth. She admitted to her jealousy, to the resentment that had grown over the years, and to the envy that had blinded her to the love I had always tried to give. I listened, not with judgment but with quiet understanding, acknowledging the pain and frustration that had driven her actions, while still making it clear that her behavior was unacceptable and could not continue. I told her that while I would not pursue further legal action, she needed to step back from interfering in my life, respect boundaries, and work on herself before attempting to repair our relationship. She nodded, her pride bruised but her eyes reflecting a mixture of shame and relief. It was not a perfect reconciliation, not a complete healing of the wounds between us, but it was a start, a recognition of truth and accountability that had been missing for years. After that meeting, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had defended myself, protected my work, and, more importantly, confronted my sister not with anger but with clarity and honesty. The months of tension, planning, and vigilance had reached a resolution, and while the relationship with Aisha would require time to rebuild, the immediate threat had been neutralized. I returned home to my mother, who embraced me tightly, tears streaming down her face, her relief palpable. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "You protected yourself, and you didn't lose your heart in the process." I held her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude that at least some bonds remained unbroken, and that love, even when strained and tested, could endure. In the following weeks, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. My business continued to grow, stronger than ever, and the people around me who had doubted me began to trust me even more after seeing how I handled the crisis. I also noticed small changes in Aisha's behavior. She began attending therapy, reaching out to distant relatives with humility, and taking steps to rebuild her life independently. The process was slow, and the wounds of betrayal could not be erased overnight, but I could see glimmers of the sister I had once known, the girl who had laughed freely and cared deeply. I realized that while some scars would remain, the effort to repair relationships was worth every ounce of patience, understanding, and resilience I had invested. Looking back on the entire ordeal, I understood that the greatest battles in life are often fought not against strangers or competitors, but against those closest to us. Family, while a source of love and support, can also become a mirror reflecting our vulnerabilities and weaknesses. I had learned that trust, once broken, requires careful attention to rebuild, and that vigilance, preparation, and integrity are essential tools in navigating the complex web of relationships. Most importantly, I learned that confrontation, when handled with honesty and calm resolve, could bring clarity and change even in situations that seemed impossible. My relationship with Aisha was no longer simple or carefree, but it was based on a newfound understanding of limits, accountability, and truth. By the time the year ended, I felt a sense of closure. I had preserved my fortune, defended my reputation, and confronted my sister with evidence, honesty, and compassion. She had finally begun to recognize the consequences of her actions, and I had discovered a strength within myself that I had never fully acknowledged. As I sat in my office one evening, watching the city lights shimmer through the windows, I reflected on how far I had come, from the boy who had struggled to survive, to the man who could defend his life and values against even the closest threats. And though I knew that the scars of betrayal would always remain, I also understood that resilience, preparation, and the courage to face difficult truths could restore balance and protect what truly mattered. In the quiet of that night, I realized something profound. Life does not always give us the happy endings we hope for, but it does reward those who are patient, who remain steadfast, and who act with integrity even in the face of betrayal. Aisha and I were not fully healed, not yet, but the foundation had been laid. I had stood my ground, defended what was mine, and faced the pain of betrayal with clarity and courage. The envelope I had once carried to court, once a symbol of my fight, had served its purpose, and now the lessons it contained had become a part of me. I knew that moving forward I would remain vigilant, but I would also allow room for reconciliation and growth, knowing that even the deepest wounds can teach resilience and that even in family, where betrayal cuts the deepest, there is still a chance for understanding, change, and perhaps, someday, forgiveness. Enjoyed the story? Like, comment, and share your thoughts with us. Subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more shocking and thrilling tales.